Hey guys, so this is video 2 on the FRQ 2020 review series, I guess if you would call it. This is going to focus on terms that have come up that could possibly come up as part of FRQ number 1. These terms are in no way like a laundry list of like, this is definitely going to be on there, but some terms do come up more than others. Where did I get this list from? Well, over the last 20 years, every FRQ that has been given on a regular admission testing of the AP exam has been made available online on the College Board website. You guys can check that out. But fortunately, I've done a lot of that work for you, and I think a lot of them are now showing up in AP Classroom, so you may see some of them anyway. So I've done a lot of the work with the help of another AP Psych teacher. We went through and itemized kind of the list. The other person had done the list before I had, and then I just kind of updated it for the last couple of years. So these are some of the common terms that show up. Like I said, you can take it either way. It can mean that these terms, well, maybe won't show up because they've been used before, or if they're used commonly, that these are something you should study. This is just kind of another tool for you to kind of figure out where FRQ1 might go. Okay, so while we're doing this, I'm going to encourage you every so often to pause the video and either take a screenshot of the screen or write down the words or take, look at your vocab notes. You should have all of these terms defined somewhere in some sort of vocab or some sort of notes. This is just to kind of help you organize your thoughts getting into studying for the AP exam. So the number one heavy hitter for the AP exam is research. That's why it's getting its own FRQ. That's why it's getting its own video. But number 2, by far, is cognition. Cognition is, when you typically think of the cognition unit, you don't think, all that much when you're thinking like, well, that's the thinking unit. How much could there possibly be? But memory is in the cognition unit, and a lot of the terms that can apply to a question 1 FRQ are going to be based on memory, because pretty much almost every situation you're in involves some sort of memory or problem solving or thinking in some way, shape, or form. So cognition tends to be really, really popular for FRQ application questions. I would break cognition up while you're studying for these, and like I said, I'm not going to go over every single term on here. That's for you guys to study, but I would break it up into a group of terms on memory, a group of terms on problem solving, a group of terms on obstacles to problem solving, and then last, the handful of terms that deal with language. You can see here that a couple of terms show up pretty frequently: proactive and retroactive interference, all of the different types of memory have come up at least once. And like I mentioned in the previous video, there may be some terms on there that you're not familiar with. For example, I can think long-term potentiation, not everybody has done. We did it in class. That's when, neurons use the same kind of network over and over and over again, and that's how you kind of remember how to do something. Another thing, like, reconstructive memory may not have been something that you talked about. But be aware that these are kind of going to be the heavy hitters for a question 1. The second unit that's a real heavy hitter for the application type questions is social psychology, but that's not on this year's exam, so we can kind of just cut that one out. And I'm not going to spend any time going over it because they've already told us that that one's not going to be on this exam. So the next one after cognition, skipping social, that's pretty heavy on the exam, is motivation, emotion, and stress. And this one, I would break it down into the 3 categories of the unit. I would break down the motivation terms, I would break down the emotion terms, and I would break down the stress terms. I'll give you a second. I'll pause for a second so you can pause. In terms of the motivation terms, pretty much all of the motivation theories have shown up. Intrinsic and extrinsic motivation have shown up. Conflict has shown up. In terms of emotion, again, a lot of those theories have shown up, James Lang, Schachter two-factor. And in terms of stress, all of the general adaptation syndrome stages have shown up. You can take that to mean that, maybe they would ask about general adaptation again, or maybe they wouldn't ask about that because they've asked all 3 stages already. It can go kind of either way. Again, this is just kind of meant to be a guide to help you study through. These are things that have been asked in the past. After motivation, we have the bio unit. This one's probably the one that I'm going to say is the biggest wild card, because there are so many parts of the brain, there are so many neurotransmitters, there are so many different functions of the nervous system that could possibly come up in here. So I definitely would not limit your studying to this list. However, Broca's area and the prefrontal cortex have shown up at least twice. I didn't personally teach genetics in the bio unit. I taught that more in development, but it does and can come up in terms of bio. You will notice, though, that in terms of like the actual neuron structure, not a whole lot of it comes up in the FRQ. Yes, nerve firing comes up, and yes, the refractory period comes up. I think my class at least did this question as an FRQ with the timing and the refractory period, but overwhelmingly for the bio unit, things that are going to come up are going to be the brain structures, the neurotransmitters, parts of the nervous system, and maybe a little bit of genetics. That idea of like heritability. Okay, next up is learning. Modeling and observational learning are the heavy hitters. Pretty much every type of learning is hit on here. Classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational learning are all on here. The different terms and the different uses of those terms, from the very vague reinforcement to the very specific negative reinforcement. The idea of schedules of reinforcers is mentioned on there. Punishment is mentioned on there. Make sure if they're asking you specifically, or it's very specifically explicit in the prompt, say, kid is acting up in a grocery store, mom spanks him. You would want to say that that is a positive punishment, right? Make sure you specifically use the specific term. I know that sounds a little redundant, but use the specific term if it's stated in the prompt. And if it's stated as a task term, then you're going to want to make sure you can use a good example from the prompt that is either a negative reinforcement or a positive punishment or whatever. Okay, next up is sensation and perception. It's pretty evenly split between sensation and perception. Sensation tends to be a little bit more vision heavy, although the basilar membrane did show up on the 2017 exam, famously after I told someone, don't worry about parts of the ear. So vision and depth perception and all that stuff does tend to show up a little bit heavier. So if you're looking for somewhere to start, I would start with vision and I would start with the depth perception stuff, but do be aware that everything else can show up as well. I'll pause here for a second so that you can pause and take a picture, whatever you need to do. Okay. Development is the next one on the list. Again, a lot of those theories are going to come up. The attachment styles. This is kind of one of the ones where names will show up. Learning is the other one where names might show up. They may be asking about how a specific person's specific theory applies to this prompt. How does Baumann's parenting styles apply in this situation? How do Ainsworth's attachment styles? You see that in this unit, and you see that in the learning unit as well. I'll give it a second. Okay, next up, not super heavy, is personality. You don't see a lot of the Freudian stuff on here. In terms of Freud, you will see sometimes the defense mechanisms, and you will see sometimes a question about, psychoanalysis in and of itself. But other than that, id, ego, superego, hadn't seen them on past exams. Doesn't mean that they can't show up. But typically when we're talking about personality, it's traits and the idea of self-efficacy, the idea of being able to do things for yourself, which self-efficacy kind of goes with its opposite, learned helplessness. Okay. Next up is intelligence. Crystallized and fluid intelligence can fall under the development unit. I teach them in development, but I also mention them really quickly in intelligence. But if there's going to be a question on intelligence, I would kind of think it would be more on the testing side of intelligence, the idea of what makes a good test, the reliability, the validity, the norming in the test, the standard distribution, bias in IQ tests. Okay. And last but not least, probably our smallest unit, which makes sense that only a handful of terms have shown up on AP exams for this unit. Two, I would definitely say, yeah, could show up. Hypnosis was actually taken out of the course description for this year, so hypnosis itself is probably not actually going to show up on the exam. But circadian rhythm has come up twice in the past, actually 3 times in the past, and drugs and drug use, things like stimulants, depressants, make sure you know those categories, has come up and what they do. It could be tied to how they affect parts of the brain as well. It could be tied to how they affect specific neurotransmitters. Okay, guys, so like I said, this is not a complete list of everything that could show up on the AP exam. This is just a list of things that have. Hopefully that helps direct your studying a little bit, and at least it gets you an idea of thinking about what could come up on the AP exam while you're studying. Try to think that terms that have like a lot of different application methods, things that could apply in a whole bunch of different situations, probably have a higher chance of showing up on the AP exam. I'll see you next video for FRQ number 2 on research.